The most important thing that people need to know is about Grandmother Moon. And that was our indigenous science, because she, in our creation story, she was taught as a young girl all these situations that was going to arise in her life. And so as a young woman, she had to be prepared for all the things, the challenges that was going to be becoming a young woman, parenting, and learning how to live in life, and knowing how to deal with grief, knowing how to deal with the challenges that arises being a single parent. Her first moment of being a grandma was trauma, because she lost her daughter. And so in losing, we had that understanding. And because that was one of her first teachings, when she was to come to this world, she was to learn about death. And today, a lot of people don't share those teachings about death, and so they're afraid of death, and they're walking around with a lot of unresolved grief, and they're piling upon grief and more grief. So she became the first woman, as we would know, of single parenting, but also raising her grandchildren. And that's been prophesied, that the grandparents will be raising their children, and that's what's happening now. And so at that time she made a choice that caused, as we say, a division. And that's what happens in any family today. When there is death, there's division in our families, and it's because of grief. But over the time, she was aware of what she did, because at the final part of her life, when her grandsons had grown up, they were now, as you would say, competing. The one that knew and remembered his instructions, he always knew his grandmother loved him, but she was filled with grief. The other one was impatient, and he wanted to do everything right away. And so that's one of the most important teachings, that Grandma had finally come to a conclusion. She was told of that, the twins in us, and that's what we have. We are impatient and we are patient. And being impatient has many consequences, and there is death. And so as a result, the one that was impatient caused the death of her daughter. And she realized later on, after time, when there was competing against each other, because the one that was impatient wanted to do the same thing as his brother, but he'd never completed anything. And so at that time, I strongly believe she saw in front of her two grandchildren rivalry. And then she wanted to make things right. And so the one that was patient, he looked at his grandmother, and he had always loved her. And and she really looked at him. I really believe that she really looked at him and asked, "I'm sorry." But he already knew, and he had an unconditional love. And in that time, I strongly believe that she made amends. And that's what we need to do in our lives. We need to make amends to our relationships, because grief does that and causes a lot of broken relationships, and we don't know how to make amends, and it causes more grief. And so at that time, she says, "I want to go home." And so he says, "I will help this unfold, grandmother, so that you can help others in the lives, all the grandchildren, and I will be there to support you." And so at that time, they say that they both put her back up. They put her back up into the sky world, because that's where she came from. She came from the sky world. And so they put her back up there. And when she went back up there, she now watches over all of us. And so we're never without a grandma. We're never without that support. We're never, never, never alone, because Grandma knows what we're going through, because she went through those circumstances in her life. And so that's why she makes her appearance 4 times. She comes as the first quarter, full moon, last quarter, and new moon. So all those phases of her face, they are very important for us. The first 3 days of every changing of the moon, there is going to be a lot of grief, sadness. And if people don't know how to relate to it, it's going to cause chaos in her life. Grandmother, she knows that the people need to bring forth those gifts that helps them to heal. And those are tears, the waters. And so that's why grandmother has control over the waters. And so at those times, those 4 times, she brings forth that, she pulls that water from you. And so that's why the tears, your emotions are like this. That's how your body is, because we are made of water. And so when we have these emotions and we don't know how to deal with it, instead we react in violence because we can't. We want to control it, but we cannot, because what she's asking us, just to simply cry, to release that, to bring up all those pains of being sad, and also to vocalize it, to cry and to express that pain that you feel. And so we cause a lot of pain in our body by suppressing a lot of these emotions, and that's why we have headaches, we have backaches. All our problems are dealing with suppressed emotions. And so that's why Grandma, she knows, and that's why she comes 4 times, is to help us. So 3 days before will be chaos. 3 days after will be renewing of your life, renewing. And everything of our creation story talks about self-care, self-care continuously. That's why we have all these teaching. It's all about self-care. The grandmothers of long ago, all the grandmothers understood that, and they shared that with their children. So they prepared their children for these things. And so the death, we understood death. It was that transition into another life. It wasn't to be gone forever, because our spirit lives on. That's what they say. Our spirit lives on. It lives on because I'm sharing this story with you. Now my spirit will carry on in you, and that story will carry on to all that are listening today, because that's how we believe. Our words are alive, and that's why we are given memory, is to help someone who is going through grief to overcome those challenges. So death, we have that understanding that there is life. It may be a death of this physical plane going into another transition of a higher conscious level, as they say, continuing our life.